everyone. Ever since I was a little girl, I have been fascinated by the stories that we tell ourselves because they help us to define who we are and how we communicate and connect with each other. I love exploring the relationship between fans, creators, corporations, and the studios that publish those stories. And that includes films, games, and books. And lately, we've been seeing how these big IPs, these big franchises, have grown within their universes. And I think one of the most prominent examples is the Star Wars franchise. There is a lot going on right now online. There are a lot of conversations between fans and the studio and the creators and the media. And I wanted to explore the relationship a bit more, but from a more holistic perspective than just my own view of Star Wars and its stories. So I invited two of my friends to join me here today, Garen Daly and Craig Miller, who are both from the different parts of the industry. So before we get going, let me just ask my two friends to introduce themselves. Garen, let's start with you.
Sure. My name is Garen Daly. I am the founder and CEO of the Boston Science Fiction Film Festival. I have been an exhibitor for art house films for over 50 years, where I book films and program films in the greater Boston area.
Great. And Craig, what about you?
I've had actually two different careers in the entertainment industry. For the last 30 years, I've been writing television, mostly animation of all kinds, both here and for countries outside of the US. But before that, my first career was as a publicity executive in motion pictures, starting with Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back.
Awesome. So, as one of those little fans back in 1977, when you started that whole machine up, I was one of the people that you were reaching out to, which is very exciting. So that kind of gets me to where I would like to open up this conversation. When Star Wars, for instance, when that was released, this, the studio put together this product. And it was something new, something people hadn't seen before. And the studio was taking a big chance on this. And in order to get the audience that they needed, they had to go out and talk to people. They had to go out to where the fans were. Craig, let's start with you, since that was kind of your baby back then. Is what did it mean? Like, how did you go about laying out a publicity plan to connect with fans, or even to develop or create that initial fan base for the studio?
There's a man named Charlie Lippincott, who was the head of marketing and licensing for Star Wars. And he knew about fandom, but he was not part of it. He didn't attend conventions or anything. I was a fan. I grew up as a science fiction and comics fan. I'd been going to conventions and putting on conventions. And I got hired by Charlie first as a consultant and then eventually on staff to reach out to fandom in order to market Star Wars. We were really the first film company that went out and approach fans directly. The studio wisdom at the time was, those people will come. Let's go and let's market it to other people. Star Wars didn't really have anything to market at the time. Science fiction wasn't popular. There were no big stars in Star Wars who could get on to talk shows or get big interviews. And so Charlie essentially invented what became known in the early 2000s as transmedia, where you take a product, a film or a TV show, out in every area you can with books and comics and toys and everything, and going to fandom. And I kind of advised him and then took over spearheading the move into talking directly to the people who would market, who would be the main audience. But we also believed, I'm a fan, you guys are fans, you will, people, you don't only talk to other science fiction fans, you talk to everybody in your life. If you're excited about this upcoming film, you'll tell them about it. And that was kind of the belief we had. Marketing to fans wasn't just to get fans to come see it, but to get them hyped up and interested a year in advance of Star Wars coming out, to talk about it to the other people they knew. And that was it was excite fandom, and it get them to spread the word.
One of the things you were just saying there, Craig, is back in 1977, at the very first Orson Welles Cinema, which is where we came from, screening of the marathon was clips from Star Wars. And the reaction that those fans had with those clips and those pieces of Star Wars created a story that I love to tell. And that is, the booker of the place at that time was a guy by the name of Larry Jackson. As soon as he saw the reaction that the fans had to the clips that were being shown at the Orson Welles Cinema, he went out and bought a whole bunch of Fox stock and made a killing on it, because it became that huge hit. But there's another thing here that I wanted to kind of address, and that is the timing of all of this. Because when you go back to 1977, it is the post-Vietnam period. And I think what George Lucas and Joseph Campbell did very well was to tap into the fact that there was no mythology out there, and they created a mythology that the masses could adopt and enjoy, that was updated for them to be able to see and experience and put it on screen. And I think that part of that entire culture of the new mythology and the Joseph Campbell hero's journey and all of that made it so much more accessible for fans to really get engaged, especially after a very dark period in the U.S. history, in our cultural zeitgeist.
I mean, I think that's very apt. When George and Gary Kurtz were doing the post-production on American Graffiti, one afternoon they were like, we've been in this room for 4 days or whatever, let's go see a movie. And they did what we did back in those days to find out what movie we wanted to see. They opened up a newspaper and looked through the movie section, and they couldn't find anything they wanted to see, because it was all, slice of life and portentous and deep, meaningful tales of society's woes, and there just weren't fun movies. And they decided, after we finish this movie, let's make something we want to go see, something exciting, something fun, something science fiction or fantasy. I mean, they wanted to tap into that fun moviegoer market, and they figured there would be other people like them who wanted to see that kind of thing. They just had no idea how many.
And again, let's give credit to where credit is due. George Lucas believed in himself so well. I mean, let's remember, Fox did not believe in this film. They did not believe in this film at all. They only released it on 42 screens, but Lucas
32.
believed in its, I'm sorry?
32.
32, even less. And when you talk about releasing a film these days where it's 4,600, 32 screens, and that's nothing. That's a drive-in release. And he believed in himself so much that he renegotiated the deal and was able to make a ton of money on the ancillaries.
Yeah. So, you guys both made me I really want to ask this question. At the time that Star Wars came out, nothing like it existed. I know we had Star Trek at the time. I know there were a few new science-y or science fiction films that had come out or that were being tested, but nobody really believed in it. Nobody understood that vision. I would love to get your takes on how Star Wars impacted the film industry as a whole. Like, do you have any thoughts, ideas, or stories on what that film did from your perspective in the area of the film industry?
Do you want to go, Craig, or do you want me to go?
Well, a couple of things. First, while it's true a lot of people at Fox and Fox's board didn't get Star Wars and were opposed to it, there were some key people. Alan Ladd Jr., of course, who was president and greenlit Star Wars, thought it would be successful. No one had any idea it was going to become what it became. No one thought it was going to be even the #1 film of the year. But Alan Ladd Jr. did believe the film would work. When they finally saw a rough cut of the film, even without special effects, people at the studio did get behind the film. And in fact, and I include in my book, Star Wars Memories, there's the head of sales for Fox, the people who actually booked the film into theaters, saw the results that the other studio executives had, and told his sales staff all over the country to go out, get the highest possible, the best theaters, the highest terms that they for an A-level film, and they started pushing in the last months. Before that, there was great doubt. And they knew that it was a hard sell to audiences because science fiction wasn't popular. So part of that 32 screen rollout was a word of mouth thing to build up audience reaction, because if you put it on a massive number of screens at the time, people wouldn't have gone to see it because there was that attitude of, oh, it's science fiction, I don't like science fiction. It needed that word of mouth build to become successful. But there was more faith behind it than originally thought. But getting to the actual question, there's no doubt that Star Wars affected people. Studios then, the executives didn't get science fiction, but they knew people went to see Star Wars. So just as they made more Westerns when a Western was successful, or more romances, they suddenly said, let's make science fiction like that Star Wars movie. They didn't know what that meant, and there was a lot of terrible movies released because they didn't understand what actually made Star Wars work. But it certainly had an effect, and continues to this day to have an effect on what's in the marketplace.
I think another thing that you may want to consider is how it affected exhibition. And, especially with, in 1977, I think the average screens theater complex had maybe 1 or 2 screens. Star Wars kind of pushed the industry, the exhibition side of industry, to make more and more screens. AMC, American Multi-Cinema, came out during that period where all of a sudden you started seeing 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and then 10 screens in one complex, which changed the dynamic of how you would release a film in the future. And so Star Wars and Jaws, both around the same time, created a whole new paradigm for how the industry looked at films showing in movie theaters.
Not just the multiplexing, but there was a sort of industry joke that exhibitors, theater owners, would prefer that you walk past the theater, throw money in the door, and keep walking. They really didn't want to deal with viewers. Conditions, cleanliness, quality of projection, sound was all deteriorating at that period because there was just no care about it. Then when Star Wars came out, in many theaters 70 millimeter, especially as it broadened into more and more as the release got wider. What theater exhibitors discovered was that people were driving by 35 millimeter houses to get to a theater that would show it in 70. Suddenly, the quality of exhibition became much more
Yes.
important. And Star Wars was the beginning driver of that. It's continued with other filmmakers doing things, the quality of equipment. Um, so more and more theaters found that if they put in 70 millimeter projectors, they would more than make up the cost of those projectors in increased revenues from Star Wars. And then they'd have 70 millimeter going forward. And, they did the same thing with in Dolby Sound and all these sorts of things. So the blockbuster films of that time drove that increased quality that we all are enjoying.
Mhm. So I have a quick question for Garen on this. And correct me if I'm wrong, Garen, but you were close to your 50th anniversary for the film festival. Star Wars is close to its 50th anniversary. I think it's just a couple years younger than your film festival. Did you notice any perceptible difference after Star Wars was released in the response to the science fiction film festival that you run now?
Wow. Going back in time, going back in time into my time machine and getting out in the 70s in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There was an excitement about film back then, I'm not sure whether that was something that was felt across the country, but it was definitely felt in the Cambridge, Harvard Square area, where film was considered to be a place where you learned about culture and you experienced with everyone. It was a community center. And I think what Star Wars did bring to it was it brought a community that had been very underserved and was basically, non-existent to some people, and brought them together in a community. And all of a sudden they found out that there were other people like themselves, and it became much more of a fandom. So I think that happened. Over the course of the years, what I've seen in the evolution of film is that the means of production have gotten into the hands of people. So now people can make a film with a camera or an iPhone or whatever, and it's relatively inexpensive. So the community of finding film in movie theaters created a community that is now making movies. And that's where our festival comes in, because we show a lot of independent filmmakers who want to make the next Star Wars, or who want to take that ability to take a story and hit into the cultural zeitgeist and explode out there. And I love it. It's all about storytelling. And if you go back to where Joseph Campbell and George Lucas was, it was all about telling the stories of mythology around the campfire. And now they've expanded the campfire globally. And I think that is just really awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And Craig, I know we're really focusing in on just this beginning era of Star Wars in this discussion. And I'd already mentioned I was a little kid when you started doing the publicity and promotion for this.
Was I?
And I can remember being a kid and collecting. I was super poor. I was one of those really super poor kids, going around collecting tin cans so that I could turn them in at the local grocery store and go buy my ticket to go to see Return of the Jedi. So whatever you were doing to market was absolutely golden. Was there anything especially new at the time that you were doing to kind of, that you remember, like maybe or inventing some new thing in order to help build or reach or connect with fandom, or even bring fans together?
It's hard to remember what was new. I mean, reaching out to fans at all was new. It was something that really wasn't done. Even Star Trek, which was in the 60s, sort of reached out to fans almost retroactively, not as part of the marketing of the show. Um, I mean, we did things, we went to conventions, we encouraged involvement from fans. It was the pre-internet, pre-digital video and all that kind of days. But we encouraged conversation. We started the official Star Wars fan club, which was aimed more. It was believed it would be more young kids joining it, but in fact, um, we wrote the newsletter. I wrote the newsletter, and it was all articles about how the films were made and interviews and things like that. That I thought if I wasn't there at Lucasfilm, what would I want to know? And so we had a lot of, you know, teenagers and adults subscribing to the Star Wars fan club to get that kind of information because we didn't have the internet and that sort of thing. And we dealt a lot with places like Starlog and Cinefantastique and the specialty science fiction film periodicals. And one weird thing we did for The Empire Strikes Back is I wrote a series of 800 messages. 800 numbers were new, and answering machines were new in the 70s. And we set up an 800 number where you could call and get a message from C3PO or Han Solo or Darth Vader or others from the film talking about things that would be in The Empire Strikes Back. And it was all sort of vague. Once you've seen the movie, you go, oh, that's what they're talking about. But it was, references to an ice planet and things like that, which we accidentally shut down the Illinois phone system because the 800 number, the systems were all mechanical back then, not computerized. So many people were calling that they could not process the phone calls, and it shut down for a short time the phone system in the state of Illinois where our phone room was. Anyway, we did all kinds of things to reach out to people. Even Star Wars was the hard one because it was a new thing. Empire, everyone says, why did you even bother? Everyone would go see it, but we treated it as, no, you want to get people excited, you want them to go, and we treated it the same way, bringing people in. And so we did a lot of reaching out. And then when I left Lucasfilm after Empire, I continued to do things like that for Warner Brothers and Disney and Jim Henson on other genre films.
Yeah, Lucasfilm, I feel like Lucasfilm really understood how to tap into that grassroots environment and connect with fans, because the guys and girls who created the film were fans. And I think they really understood that. And that's one of the things today that when I look at, you're scrolling through social media and you're seeing nowadays this real tension between fans and Disney or the creators at Disney. And I don't know, it just feels really different right now. Just
Can I jump in for a second? I wanted to bounce off something that Craig said. A lot of what I liked about the Star Wars and what they did was how they really went after the many different quadrants that are out there for the audience. And they did it with comic books. They did it with all bunch of things. And it's what I call the Rocky and Bowinkle effect. Now, I don't know if any of your listeners remember Rocky and Bowinkle, the cartoon show on TV. But what made that show so really dynamic was that, first of all, it was a cartoon so that the really young kids could really understand what was being said. And then there was some snarky humor in there that the kind of like the tweens would get. And then the adults would laugh at some of the stuff that was definitely underneath all of that. And the teens would start figuring out, well, wait a minute, what's something going on here? And so all four quadrants of those people enjoyed the show so much, which was why it became a success. And I would say that I think that the smart people behind the marketing of Star Wars looked at that model and said, how do we reach everybody? How do we get everyone to come? How do we get the kids to come? How do we get the teens to come, and how do we get the adults to come? And I think that has been their success, because they've gone out and they've done it multimedia across many platforms. So they're bringing in people all the time, and they're continuing to do that, which to their credit is how they've been able to sustain the franchise for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're coming up on time here. And before we wrap up, I just want to ask last thoughts. So, if looking back at our conversation, we really have focused on those early days of Star Wars, those early days of building fans, how to engage them, who to engage. If you were going to give advice to studios today, for today's fans and today's environment with all of our new digital tools, what advice would you give to Disney, basically, on how to connect with fans in today's environment? And maybe Craig, we'll start with you on that.
You know, it's tough. I think a lot of the same things still apply. We have a problem in that not just Star Wars fandom, but there's a lot of toxicity in all fandoms: comics fandom, gaming, Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, DC. I see it in a lot of places. A lot of it, some of it seems to be focused on so-called wokeness. And I think that's all, I really think that that's silly. No, every story is not going to appeal to everybody. And there's a lot of people who have built a feeling of ownership within whatever it is that they are deeply a fan of, Star Wars or whatever. And they want everything from that. I hate to say, use terms like this, but from that IP, from that universe, to be a story that relates to them as much as the first one that won their heart. But when you're building out something as broadly as the Marvel universe or the DC universe or Star Wars, not every story, not every focus is going to appeal to everybody. You know, I loved Andor,
Me too.
that series. I'm not as crazy about Mandalorian, which I kind of felt nothing was happening, just episode after episode where not much happened. You know, but other people love Mandalorian. You know, so it's like, if you like westerns, you're not going to love every western movie. You're not going to love every baseball movie. Not every Star Wars movie is going to be for you. But from the studio perspective, you market it to, as we've said, all four quadrants, and you market it to the people who there are specifically things for. You know, that was one of my specialties when I was still in the movie marketing business, was finding what there was for people. You know, when I was doing Excalibur, we did a thing with Bride magazine on the wedding of Arthur and Guinevere. You know, the studio was afraid it would affect the male dominant marketing they were doing on the film, but it's like, you know, college guys are not going to see Bride magazine. But you know, it's there a lot. You don't have to focus every movie or every TV show on everybody. You could market it piecemeal.
Yeah,
But there's, you know,
I think that's
I
a
don't
good
think,
point. I think
yeah,
that's a good point, that while not everyone is going to like every story that's written, you know, I think that it's really important that every story be told well, written well, crafted well.
yeah,
And as long as
absolutely.
you hit that mark, you're okay.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because I've seen some pretty good films and some pretty good stories that have just, that's really seen the light of day. And a lot of it has to do with the structure that Hollywood is in right now, where you have these global markets and you have these enormous costs to build out a film, and then you have the enormous cost of marketing the film. So you have to get these large blockbusters to just to be able to break even, and that's what Wall Street wants to see. So the money people are saying this is what we want to see. The problem that we face right now is, how do the good stories get made? How do we find the venue to be able to see it? There was a hope that streaming could be part of that, but again, big business has gotten in it and gotten in the way. So it really, to me, and I have a bias here, it's all about film festivals and the small people bringing up the great new talent that's coming along, because that's where you're going to see the really good stories with the creativity of good scripts, good acting, and not necessarily the big special effects, but just a really good story. And that to me is the essence of what Star Wars started out and why fandom really loved it.
I agree. Film festivals are part of it. Yeah, we all hope that streaming would let us see more of the smaller movies, but the MBAs who run those corporations want blockbuster streaming movies. Everything has to be the number one film on streaming, and a small success doesn't make them happy. And that's a problem with any creative. I mean, it's a problem in publishing, it's a problem on Broadway and in theater. Everyone wants to be the number one hit, and and I agree. I want everything I do to be the number one hit. But, sometimes it's okay to just be successful and not be fabulously successful.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. And having kind of myself come through the literary side of things, I have always believed that, and I started out not liking short stories. I feel really embarrassed to say that to all of my writer friends. I started out not liking short stories till I went through my MFA program, and I realized that short stories are where the true experimentation happens in literature, where you can find new forms, you can try new things that you really couldn't waste time on in a novel and have it get picked up by a publisher who's willing to take a chance on that kind of story being told in that kind of way. Whereas with the film festival, it does seem like the same kind of philosophy, where you can take a chance on a smaller film, on a lesser known film that's more experimental, and see how it goes. And then the big companies say, oh, look, that worked out really well. We can try that because we've seen it work now. Um, so I think there is something to be said there. But I think we're pretty much at time here. Any final last thoughts or anything that we haven't covered yet that you guys want to chime in on before we go?
I think that when we look at the impact of Star Wars and the impact of fandom, it cannot be underestimated. I think
Mm-hmm.
that, again, we have created a new culture, and again, based on that mythology. And I think that says that we have a thirst for that mythology. I'm hopeful that there'll be more stories like Star Wars that more people will be able to find and create and feel comfortable about, that somehow explains their own existence, because mythology is about it's the old Bruno Bettelheim in Uses of Enchantment. And I don't know if you know what that book is, but it's a wonderful story how fairy tales and mythology help us cope with the world. And in these days, we need as much mythology as possible just to cope with what's going on in the United States and in the globe, globally.
Yeah.
Point taken. Craig, any final thoughts, last
Yeah.
words?
Um, just that there again, there's no question Star Wars has had a massive effect on the entertainment industry and on people, um, on science fiction as a whole. People who 40 years ago said, "Oh no, I'm not interested in science fiction," now go to science fiction movies, um, whether they read science fiction or not. If they read, they may read science fiction. A lot of people don't read at all, but yeah, it's affected how we tell stories. A lot of the mythology within Star Wars and other science fiction films, of course, is like Campbell, like Bettelheim, classic tropes put into different milieus. But it is our collective unconscious telling stories, learning about society, learning how to deal with other people. And it's an important way of looking towards not just the past, which a lot of things like fairy tales were once upon a time, but in the future. Star Wars took that a long time ago, once upon a time, but put it into the future. And we can tell stories about ourselves in the future. And I think it's an important thing. And I think Star Wars helped open that up for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Well, thank you both, Garen and Craig. Thank you so much for being here and having this chat with me. I am and will always be a member of Star Wars fandom, and I am really grateful to Lucas and Lucasfilm and all of the creators and all of the people throughout the generations, or over the years, that have helped to sustain this particular franchise, because I do think that it feeds into our ideology and even our identity. And I think that's why Star Wars fandom is so passionate. And, again, I really do hope that this franchise continues and Disney works on finding a way to embrace current fans and bring in new fans, because it is, I think, a really important story to tell, because it's how we get to know ourselves and each other. And it's a great way to keep those lines of communication open. So, guys, again, thank you so much. And we'll continue this conversation, or I'll continue this conversation, maybe looking at the evolution of the cinematic universe in the future, and talk about what some of those new stories are that are coming out. And I hope everybody has enjoyed this conversation, and we will see you guys later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.